So, Jeff, what is the most difficult part of learning the guitar?
Putting in the time, realizing that it's absolutely just about doing the work. There's no magic. Now, some people have some extra fairy dust. They do. They just do. But 99% of it is just doing the work. That's it. And I struggle with it all the time. You play with somebody and they've got some stuff together and you're like, yeah, I just got to practice more. Period. That's it. Like anything, anybody who's good at anything, as the old expression goes, if it were simple, everyone could do it. Yeah.
During your journey with the guitar, how did you best break through plateaus or any kind of slumps that you had?
Persevere, but also just go to other people, go to gigs, get together with friends, take a lesson with someone who does something you want to be able to do. Sometimes I recommend it, but not too much, is like, copying somebody else. I got really into, say, Jeff Beck, and then realized I was getting too into Jeff Beck to sound like a poor imitation of the unimitatable. You know what I mean? Like, so then, but to kind of get into, you try to get into somebody else's head, and that introduces you to different ideas. And then after you start working on it, if you're conscientious about not sounding like someone else, because why would a grown human being want to sound like somebody else, really? I think Wayne Krantz said that to me many years ago when he was talking about somebody. He's like, talking about something else. He's like, why would a grown man want to sound like somebody else? And it was a good point. And so I kind of always remembered that. So if you kind of, after a while, I'm sure you're saying, like, you've learned a lick from whoever, and then it's yours now, and it doesn't sound like the way you stole it from whoever. So I think if you're conscious of that. But for me, it was always like putting on a record, digging into somebody really heavily who is a little bit outside of what you do, and then running with that.
Perfect. Do you feel like there are any passive behaviors that contribute to guitar development, such as listening to different kinds of music or even learning another instrument?
I never really learned another instrument because I'm really impatient, and I just started learning piano. I was like, most is just taken away from the guitar time. And I'm always envious of the people who are actually good at multiple instruments, like really good. I wish it certainly can only inform what you do, but I never went that route. But yeah, listening, like conscientious listening to stuff away from the instrument. Or I know this isn't necessarily passive, but one important thing I think really made a difference for me, and I tell everybody, and anybody I know who's a player has done this, you never not have the guitar in your hand. Like, you're watching TV, it's in your hand. You're surfing the internet, it's in your hand. Like, so I think there's like a connection you make, like a mind-body connection of just where stuff is. When somebody's like a new student or something, like they hit the guitar and stuff because they have no spatial awareness of the instrument. You know what I mean? So I think if it's in your hand, you just kind of know where things are. And then also if you're watching TV, just try to match something like, what was that chord? What chord is that? And try to figure it out. And what I've loved, and I do that much to actually, my wife's gotten to the point we don't watch TV together because she's like, you know what I mean? Like after
Yeah,
20
absolutely.
something years of marriage, she's like, I'm gonna just be down over here. But the cool thing is, sometimes I hear a chord and I'm like, oh, I'm right. Like got the right pitch, got the right chord, and, so that's kind of cool. And I think that comes from that's not necessarily passive, but it's not active ear training, if you know what I mean.
That's awesome. Do you have any pre-practice or performance rituals to really get you in the zone? They could be technical or maybe, something related to breathing, meditation, anything like that.
I'm trying to meditate more. I kind of got into it with TM not that long ago through a friend of mine, which has been great. It's like exercising. You're into it for a while, you start feeling better, and you stop doing it. So I'm that kind of way with the TM stuff. I think before gigs, I just try to warm up a bit. It depends where you're playing. Oftentimes it's not doable. If it depends if it's a bar or if they don't really have a backstage or there's a band before you or whatever and you're setting up. So I try to practice at home. But the main thing I do is I just know the material. Like if I know the tunes really, really well, whether they're my own, I still run over them, then I at least have got that covered. So I don't have to worry about thinking about like, shit, where's it go now? Or you're looking around because that's the worst. And I've been in that situation. Like, yeah, I know it. And you get on stage like, I don't know it.
Yeah. And sometimes you write hard stuff and it's hard to remember how
Yeah,
it goes.
or just you're being paid and you're like, yeah, I got it, it's easy, and you can't remember because maybe if you're playing for somebody else and the tunes are relatively easy and you're like, oh wait, how's this one go now? And I try not to be the guy in my gig. I'm not doing these kind of gigs, but I do never want to be the guy who's reading charts on stage if I can avoid it. I mean, certain gigs are okay, that's fine, certain clubs, but if you're doing like a real gig and you're reading charts and you're like one of the main guys, I just don't think it's a great look. you know.
Absolutely.
Yeah, but in New York, I understand it because everybody's working. Like, yeah, I can only pay people so much, and I'd rather they not mess up. Like, I'd rather the bass player not mess up than not have a chart. So for me, just knowing the material, that's a hard lesson that I learned. Seems obvious, but you know, lots of hubris involved in that. So.
Yes, fantastic. Did you ever have any prolonged period where you didn't play the guitar at all, maybe due to an injury or something like that?
Not prolonged, but I do have some hand issues, from repetitive stress. So it's never been more than a few weeks, that I still kind of play it. There's never been a time, fortunately, where I could not play at all. But there were times where I had to back way, way off, and it's never good. Like emotionally for me, it's bad, especially because when you see like your calluses sort of going a bit, and and I find like some people, if they're stressed, they'll go outside and smoke a cigarette or whatever people do these days. Like it seems like everybody's smoking pot everywhere now. So maybe that, like it's legal in New York. So it's like, oh my God, like
So much weed. You're
it
getting a
is. It's
contact
amazing.
high
It's unbelievable,
from stepping on the street.
Yeah, you're walking on the street and you're like, well, this used to be illegal and now everybody stinks of pot. It's funny. Anyway, so I'll just play guitar for a couple minutes, just something to kind of reset my emotional state. So when I can't play it, that kind of flips me out. I think it's good to take a few days away. If you go on vacation or you go somewhere, like, sometimes I don't. I almost always bring a guitar because I regret when I don't, but sometimes I don't play it. Yeah, but that's a kind of a cool, fresh feeling when you pick it up again. You're like, oh, kind of new.
Yeah, very similar experience. Yeah. I have these interesting kind of withdrawals from it if I'm like too occupied with other stuff. And it's like, and being not only a musician, but you're an entrepreneur and you're a content creator and you have this massive business that's not just playing.
Oh, yeah. Very little of it. It's like you're editing video for days on end and you're like, oh man, I haven't actually played the guitar. And that doesn't help any of the repetitive stress stuff. You're on the computer and then you want, sitting like this.
Totally. During any point in your guitar journey, did you develop a habit or less than ideal technique that you've tried to fix?
Oh, yeah. I had some real issues. My first issues came after college, and I used to play with my wrist bent, like, because that's the way Randy Rhoads played in a poster or two. And I realized, as the doctor said when I started going, he's like, well, do this and then do that, and then tell me what one feels easier. And it was like, so I had to change everything, it was fairly quick because it made playing easier. It stopped any kind of carpal tunnel that was starting to kick in at that point. Because I was practicing like a lunatic, it was right after college, like 8 hours a day kind of thing. When you live in your parents' basement, you don't really have to worry about, real life or bills or anything like that. So it was formative times. That was, I had to change the way I played, and that was it was for the best. It took some time, but that was really good. I think. Does that answer that question? I think.
Yeah, totally.
Okay,
No,
great.
it's great. Yeah. Do you have a kind of a tried and true practice routine?
No. I mean, I try to do technique every day, just because I think that's like going to the gym, or at least I'm told. If that stuff's easy to go. Like I find that, and painfully, the older I get, the faster it goes, or it takes longer to get back. And I think that's the case with everybody as they start to get a little older. So just every day, I'll just run scales or while watching TV, do that. Now, I'm fortunately like yourself. You're not at a point you can run scales and watch TV because your basic technique is there. So it's not like when you're younger and just learning. If you're just learning, I would not recommend that because then you're not paying attention. But you know what your scales. You went to school and the whole thing. You got the whole thing together. So when you can do that. And I think it was a quote from Itzhak Perlman. He says his favorite time to practice is during basketball season. That's something I do every day. I play, and for a kind of emotional or just kind of musical thing, I end up playing like a blues by myself every day. Just some sort of thing, and then try to just expand on that, and it just kind of gets me into a creative mindset. At least where I felt like I did something that was creative.
Yeah, very cool. So unaccompanied and
Yeah.
single notes and connecting chords and things like that.
Yeah, just start off simple and then just see where it takes me and work on. I always end up feeling I'm coming up with something a little different or just perfecting what it is. And what I try to do a lot of times is practice with intent. Go in with like, okay, I'm not just going to pick up the guitar and go, because we're so overwhelmed with all the stuff that even as professionals we want to do. I just did a gig with Matt Schofield the other day, and I'm like, or Robin or something like that. You're like, oh,
Uh,
So there's always I should work on this or should work. So I will try to pick up something, think about something ahead of time. So I'm not, you know what I mean. If you don't have an idea going into what you want to practice, you just start putting on, and suddenly you find yourself watching YouTube or something, watching Alan Haldsworth, and you're like, what am I watching this for? I can't do this. You know what I mean? Like, I'm gonna do this, and you're like, no, you aren't. So just find a thing that you want to work on ahead of time. And I try to remember to do this. I don't always remember to do this, but when I do, I find I end up getting more out of the time.
Yeah, and just being mindful about you're going in and you have something specific to work on. And
Yeah.
then you're also like kind of fantasizing about it beforehand, and it
Yeah.
like raises that level of excitement and the emotion and the connection to it, right?
Yeah, and then I think like you do courses and videos. Like sometimes I feel like I'm lazy, which I realize I'm not, but you know what I'm saying. You still feel that way, and I think that's what makes us do what we do. Is a lot of it's this stuff's percolating in the background, and I strongly believe that stuff. So sometimes if you're working on something and you're just thinking about it while you're doing something else, it starts to kind of make its way into your playing and a little bit. I mean, of course, you have to work on the physical angle of it so it connects, but I think mentally that's a big part of it too.
Sure. Yeah, and you have at this point you have such a visceral connection like in your mind with what the guitar feels and sounds
Yeah,
like where
sure.
your visual representation and the audiation in your mind you can just be like kind of there and practicing in your mind even away from the guitar.
Right. And then, but the more, yes, but the cool thing about that is the more you do that, the more it actually, when I found I actually thought about this stuff. And I've read some studies, they say if you practice something, and then you go to bed and you think about it if you just play through it in your mind before you go to bed, it actually the memory of it sits better with you. So I try that if I do that or I listen to a podcast and fall asleep. So,
Yeah, that's awesome.
yeah.
What was the single most effective thing that you've learned that opened the door to playing guitar?
Oh, yeah. Okay. Just everything up and down one string. Like seeing the guitar as like six individual pianos in a way.
Yeah.
And sure, all. Yeah, it's just because guitar players, it's the great thing about guitar is if you can play three chords, a pentatonic scale, you can kind of be in a band, or something. But if you want to get past that, it's difficult. And seeing everything as pictures, guitar is very picture oriented, which is awesome in certain ways, as we know. I want to play in B flat. Okay, I'm just going to move up a half step from A. Now I'm in B flat. But then you're stuck in where So when you start to learn the guitar as one string at a time, you start to see how it functions and how you can. This is the same as that. This is that. And then you have musical choices of, well, the E string sounds like this, but that same note on the G string sounds like this. And then you start getting into guys like that we love, whether it's Eric Johnson or Jeff Beck or someone. You're like, oh, you start to choose where you want to play something because it sounds different. And also you just get to know that. It makes me insane when I hear even professional players. There's some guys who I hear talk about this, and it makes me crazy. It's like, I don't want to learn too much because I feel like it's going to hamper my creativity. And I'm like, I think to me, with all due respect, it's the stupidest freaking thing. It's like, I don't want to learn how to speak properly because I feel it's going to. I don't want to learn how to spell because I feel like it's going to. I don't want to know about history because it's going to feel like it's going to.
Don't educate yourself.
People say to me, like, you don't play like you went to Berkeley. I'm like, what does that mean? Like, you don't speak like you went to college. What? Like, and you don't have to go to college. I'm not saying that, but if anything you do, if you're gonna play the guitar, then play the guitar and educate yourself on the instrument. It makes it faster. It makes things go much more quickly.
Totally. And it's not that and we're going to get to a question like this in a moment, but it's not that you're thinking of those things in the moment when you're trying to be creative and make music.
No, not at all. No. It's like you don't think about words, but it's great to learn a new word, because you can, put it in what may be an uncomfortable word at first to get into your vocabulary, use it once or twice, and then suddenly you feel like you can freely use apotheosis in your sentence.
Absolutely. Okay, kind of similar subject. How do you approach learning new techniques and incorporating them into your playing?
A little bit at a time. Like you watch. Perfect example. Perfect. And I'm going to talk to him as I grew up being a metal guy and still love that stuff and still. I got known as a blues guy through largely like True Fire and instructional stuff, and I am a huge blues fan. But like playing with Rob, and he's like, "You're not really a blues guy, are you? You're like a rock guy." And I'm like, "Blues, rock, jazz influence guy." I'm like, "Yeah." Like a lot of guys of my generation, that was the thing when guitar was the big thing. It's not like an old guy. But it was true at that point. I mean, Eric Johnson had a top 40 hit. I mean, think about how crazy that is by today's standard. Joe Satriani had, Safe Surfing with the Alien was on the radio. So that's crazy. I would say, I lost my train of thought now. I think I need more coffee. What was the question again?
How do you approach learning new techniques?
Yeah, okay, right. So Troy Grady. Okay, so I'm like, man, I should be able to play these Eric Johnson things a little faster. I've got good technique, but it's kicking my butt. I economy pick. I do all this. I'm like, why can I not get this? So one of my students like, you ever watch the Troy Grady videos? I'm like, no, but I think they're cool, but I just never watched them. And I was like, oh, if I just what he talks about, angle my pick and do this escape thing. Now I did, but not the same way. And I was like it was literally like when doctor says, hey doc, it hurts when I do this. Well, then don't do that. And then it's like immediately just made it happen. So then I would take that and start working on it. And the mechanics of it. So I'm going to take my time, take a little bit of the idea at once, and start to kind of work through it, and then it starts to expand. I think when you try to do all of it at once and go nuts, it doesn't stick.
So you really break it into chunks and kind of compartmentalize and say, okay, well, how do I kind of break this down and work on that?
And then just even repeat the same idea over and over again, so it starts to become just habit. Your technique becomes what you do. It's just that real concentration. One thing that was helpful, and maybe going off, is that I just really stare at either hand while I'm doing it. Just stare at it. Like, just concentrate solely on that's what it looks like. That's what it feels like, what it looks like. Oh, I'm getting it. And then when I just look at it, because I concentrate on it, because we have two things we have to think about, and that was helpful.
Yeah. What's your advice for aspiring guitarists who are looking to find their own voice and signature sound on the instrument?
As someone who's still trying to do that, I think one of the problems, and I think a lot of guys like myself and yourself, who are working musicians, a lot of the guys that we really look up to don't do other things. They do that thing. Do you know what I mean? Like, so Jeff Beck is Jeff Beck. He's got many different styles, but he didn't have to make a living doing gigs that weren't the Jeff Beck group, or you know what I'm getting at? Or like, so Clapton was blues, he did his thing, or you're talking about, John Mayer, or the people, or, Bonamassa or something. These are great guitar players, of course, but, playing with Matt Schofield, like, he just, when you have him talk, it was blues since the first day, B.B. King, that's it. Doesn't really know much about hard rock or, like, there's stuff that he does know, I'm not saying he doesn't, but, I wanted to be able to play everything. And then what starts to happen is, then the guys that we all look up to were the guys who just did that thing, So if you want to learn how to play some Halsworthy stuff, as I mentioned before, like, which is impossible, like, there's only one, and only thing Alan Halsworth did was work on being Alan Halsworth, So that would be my thing, is like, you got to learn your history and then just be your own person. You got to really focus in on that, and it's very seductive to fall into the other realm. Plus side of that is, it can make a good living doing a whole bunch of different things, But even the guys who cover all those different styles really well, they would all admit that they can't cover it as well as the guy who's the guy for that thing. So my advice would be, if you really, really want your own voice, I would figure out what it is that you really, really want to do stylistically, and really commit to that, and realize that I didn't, because, for a long time, that it's okay not to be great at other things, because the guy who's the best at that one thing, like Eddie Van Halen, can you imagine Eddie Van Halen doing a blues gig? Probably, and when you hear him on those jams, he sounds like Eddie Van Halen. So, like, whereas if you're trying to do work and you're trying to work as a musician, you got to be able to fit and wear a bunch of different shoes or different hats, So those guys never thought about that. There was a single-mindedness of just, I'm going to be the baddest motherfucker that ever walked the planet in this kind of music. And then when you hear him play something else, they might be okay at it, but they're not. Eddie Van Halen is,
the ultimate Eddie Van Halen.
Exactly. And would you want to hear Eddie Van Halen play a country gig? No, of course not.
Excellent. How do you maintain creativity and avoid getting stuck in a musical rut?
I don't know. I'll let you know. My biggest thing, I have a hard time, since the business takes up a lot of my time. One of the things I have a hard time with is, like, I'm practicing. I'm like, oh, I should make a video. I'm like, no, this should be my thing. Yeah, it's really hard, man, because it's Well, the music business is so different. Like it's not. I don't know. How old are you?
I'm 37.
Okay, so I'm 56. There was a viable music business when I started. Like people were still touring and there were records, you know what I mean? And CDs were coming in, people were still buying CDs. And then, when Napster and all that stuff started kicking in, I mean, you can still do it, but the living now is not from that. It's from like content creation and all these things. Or you're out in the road doing that stuff. So it's very hard I find, to continue to be creative as a musician, creative as a guitar player, get better as a guitar player, and YouTube videos and create courses and run the business. And so it is very, very difficult. So I think what I have to do is decide on a recording date or something. I'm going to, having like the record with Robin, he was like, hey, well, I got a few months. Let's do a record together. And I was like, what? And he was like, well, okay, what tunes do you have? And so I was just like madly writing. I did a tune or two from my first CD because it just worked really well with he and I. And he's like, let's just do that one. I really like that one. And he says, what are you going to say? No. No, I'm not doing that one. But there's a few songs in the record I'm really proud of and happy with that they were, because there was a deadline and I had to come up with something. And so I work better with deadlines. But it's hard to create your own deadline and stick with it because sometimes this is the Scottish upbringing of the creative endeavors. They aren't really going to make me the money. I need to make the money. Like, you know what I mean? Like I got a family, you got a house, you need to make the money. And so that will take precedence very often over my own, needs of the many outweigh the needs of the few. The Star Trek quote. So I'm not complaining. Please don't. I'm not at all. It's just I think it's something that every musician goes through. Like they have to, I'm being really creative, but money's really tight. So those are decisions, and financial stability is quite a nice feeling after decades of not having it.
I'm kind of an interesting person. I went the very conservative route, which I didn't really plan on, but I started teaching professionally like during college, like in 2007, and got out of school and had 60 half-hour guitar students.
Yeah,
and
you're in it. Yeah.
Yeah, and then it was like, okay, cool, I'll take every possible gig, and played 200 to 300 gigs a year for several years. And then it was like, as it evolved and I met more people in the business, very much like you've been a great influence and given me a lot of insight, and kind of zoomed out a little bit. It's like, oh, okay, I can do this in a different way. But very much like I released a record last year, and it's like, okay, it would be great to do another record. However, and especially one that's like more of my modern voice and who I am and what I want to do. But who's going to listen to it? And how much money is it going to cost? Because I'm certain it's not going to make any.
That's the biggest thing, and like, I'm going to bring up Matt again, who's just a great friend. And he's like, people are always like, hey, man, me too. When are you going to do another record? I'm like, did you buy the first one or you just listen to it streaming? Like, I can't, to do a record for real, $10,000, $15,000, $20,000, easily. Yeah, and then you're not going to make that. There's just no way. So that's some of the issues with it. And so where do you want to put your money most intelligently? And be creative and enjoy stuff. But yeah, it's rough. And people think, yeah, when's that new record? Did you actually buy my record or you just stream it, So I just try not to get dark about it. I just go, well, look, that's just what it is right now. And if I choose to do that, that's on me. But right now, I'm also kind of experimenting with the idea in my head of just releasing a song here and there,
I love that. Mm-hmm.
Just, go to the studio, don't worry about the pressure of a record, record 3 tunes and just put them out. And then at the end, if you try to do that over the year or so, you get a few tunes and you put it together as a record, if you want.
I love that. And as a content creator, would you do full video production as well?
No, I don't think anybody cares about that.
Interesting.
Seriously, I mean, I have not found the videos. This is the weird thing. Is like the videos of me teaching guitar, or the performance videos I've posted have been well received from people. I'm very happy about that, but they don't get that many views.
Yeah, same thing.
Yeah, they just don't. And it's interesting. A lot of other musicians, and I've talked to guys. They start a different channel. They have their YouTube instructional, guitar thing, and then they have their performance channel because, the YouTube algorithm numbers, you want to keep on putting out a video that, oh, it's me playing with my band, you get like, 1,000 views, and your next video on talking about open G tuning gets like 250,000 views, and then your video after that gets 3,000 views. Like, you know what I mean? Like, when I had one video totally explode, and then the next one, it was like, oh, what happened? Yeah. So I found through lots of advice from people, If people, they're not. That's not what they're coming to see you do. And as annoying as that can be to my ego at times, it's just what you gotta do.
What is the number one piece of advice that you'd give someone just beginning to learn, so a beginner level guitar player?
It's difficult. Be patient. Like you get it. It's just you got to bust through it, and then you got to bust through the bar chords. Once you get past the bar chords, as you know, you're like the ball starts rolling. So you just have to really be persevere. And also the fallacies that people's like, oh, should I start in an acoustic guitar? I'm like, no. Like,
Do you like electric?
yeah, exactly. Like, what do you listen to? I like, whatever, name whatever band that I might sound, ridiculous. I love Nirvana. Okay, get an electric guitar. I really love blues. Okay, get an electric guitar. I love James Taylor. Okay, get an acoustic guitar. Like, yeah, right. So I think that's one of the biggest pieces of advice is and get, if you can, the great thing is guitars are so inexpensive now. I mean, good ones, just buy a Squire Strat, decent guitar, get the thing you want to play.
Totally. What is the number one piece of advice that you would give an intermediate guitarist?
It gets better. Concentrate on small things. Like, a lot of guys will, okay, learn this solo. And I'm like, okay, those are the notes. Now listen again and see how they play it. So like, there's those little things that that make you sound better. If you have decent vibrato, you're going to sound better. If your bends are in tune, you're going to sound a lot better. If your time is good, you're going to sound a lot better. So, Albert King, obviously one of the greatest, like relatively small vocabulary, but brilliant. So what I'm saying is like, I try to explain to him like, well, look, if you listen to Albert King solo, he's playing like 5 licks all the time. But I buy it every single time he plays it. You know what I mean? Like it's still the greatest thing ever. And I'm not trying to be any kind of dismissive and not in any way. But my point is like, if you're working on your soloing and you're feeling like you're having a hard time, just try to refine what it is you already have. And that'll take you really far. And also carries in the other things too,
Fantastic. What role has music theory played in your development as a guitarist, and how do you strike a balance between theory and instinct when playing?
Oh, one is practice and one is playing. You know what I'm saying? Like I don't think about music theory at all when playing. But it's things that I will have practice that will come out in my playing, hopefully, that may have started from a musical theory angle. A musical theory, I mean, just like we talked about a little earlier, it's just, I'm a professional musician. I'm going to say to someone, it's this chord it's this thing on the 5th fret. I'm like, what the fuck? You know what I mean? Like, what's the name of the chord? Or the numbers, like, oh, it's a flat 6. Like people think that freaks out. Well, what's the 6th note of the chord? And we'll flat it. Like it's not hard. It's not hard. I mean, advanced theory, look, the practice of doing it, the implementation of it can be difficult, yes, but understanding it, it's just, people say like, oh, you must be really good at math. I mean, no, I'm terrible at math. It's easy. Music theory is not incredibly difficult. It's just memorization. Anyway, so theory has been great for me because it expands, what it is I hear. You start working on a new idea. At first it sounds weird. And then after a while, you're like, oh, that sounds better. I like that now. Like, not hitting the root every time. Like, oh, I can hit the 3rd and I know that that's a 3rd. So when I'm playing, I don't think about music theory. It's the stuff that I practiced ahead of time that comes out when you're playing, hopefully.
Fantastic. How do you approach improvisation, and what tips do you have for creating memorable solos on the spot?
You got to tell a story. It was actually kind of tough in a way. My first band that I toured with a lot was kind of an improvisational thing. We'd open solo sections, and then I had like a steady gig at the 55 bar for a long time, and I would solo until I was done. And then the hardest part was when I would have a pop solo thing. Like, oh shit, you mean it? What do you mean I can't keep on going? But I grew up listening to my favorite guitar players would be Jeff Beck or David Gilmour, Michael Schenker. These guys who could just build a solo really beautifully well. And then getting more into the jazz thing, kind of like when I first got heavily into, was way into Mike Stern, who was a master of building tension in a solo, or Robin, or any of these guys that I love. B.B. King. So you have to tell a story. So the roadmap is, it's cliche, but it really works. Like, you're got to go up. Like, you're starting here and you kind of keep on going and you're feeling, and you end up at a climax, hopefully, So I think if I feel like I'm as cliche as it sounds, it's telling a story. Does this make sense? Like, what am I, is it not like that, someone on the train, like, oh, look, cows. Like you're playing something and then suddenly you're just playing this other thing that had nothing to previously do with what you were playing beforehand. So, yeah, and then just listen to all the great guitar solos. Like, listen to the Crossroads solo from Clapton, both of them. They're like freaking amazingly constructed.
Perfect. Yeah.
Perfect. Yeah. Starts down here, ends up behind. Filling in space doesn't mean playing more notes. Maybe means holding a note, anything like that. But you have to tell a story. You have to keep people's attention. Yeah. Main thing is don't start off high because where are you going to go?
Number one tip.
Yeah, exactly.
Don't start too high.
Yeah.
Do you hear a note in your mind before you play it?
Sometimes it depends what it is I'm playing. Obviously, if you're playing more fast, I hear the overall sound of what I'm kind of going for, and that comes from practicing. Like I want to do something. I don't even know. You just play. But the more that you would practice incorporating, upper structure triad thing, whatever, I want to put this triad over the top of that. The more you get that in your head, you hear that sound and it becomes part of your vocabulary. Just like I'm not thinking about using a word when I'm speaking to you, because learned a language, And I'm trying to learn Italian right now. It's really hard to learn a language as an adult. So I understand when students are, like, I have a hard time putting this together. I'm like, oh yeah, I know what you mean. Yeah.
Yeah, I really appreciate how you're very articulate about like learning things specifically and advanced things, but then a lot of letting go.
Yeah.
The kind of that balance of those two things, which is really cool.
You have to. And my favorite thing about improvising, I was talking to Tim Pierce. We were blabbing about this, and like we were. I forget how the conversation was. I said, well, the way I really play is when you see me live. That's who I really am.
Absolutely, same, 100%.
Yeah. And one of my favorite guitar players, my favorite thing about live is that I don't give a fuck until I hear the recording back, which is unfortunate. It's the horrible part about modern society. Because, like the moment was there, people were on board, it was fun. If I clammed because I'm not gigging 6 nights a week, and there's a lot to be said for that gig chops. But, 80% was there, 70, 90%, 85%. And I've had conversations with other guys who you've interviewed who I will not drop. They all feel the same way. You're like, yeah, man, you can't make it to the 12-bar blues without making one little freaking thing that drives you crazy. I'm like, yeah, it's
I knew where the right note was.
Exactly. Because you're not doing it, as regularly as that would require. So for me, like, I just go for it. My favorite players are always living on the edge. When you have an experience of playing with Robin, like there's no licks. There's just nothing. He just plays. Just comes right out, and if he hits a clam, he's like, well, no, I was going for it, and I've heard him hit a clam or two, but it doesn't matter. And he look over and he goes, like, I don't care. He just laughs, because he's just like, yeah, no, we're in it. We're trying to do the thing. So that's why I try not to think too much, unless there's chord changes. Unless there's something very difficult that I have to tackle, which I usually try to avoid as much as possible. But if there is there's some changes, then I'll have to really think about it. 'Cause that's not my bag, really.
Totally. Yeah. What is your favorite way to visualize the fretboard?
I don't have a specific one. I think it's a number of things. You learn something from each way. So if I do each note individually, that's awesome. If you do arpeggios, that's awesome because you're seeing the guitar maybe, horizontally versus vertically. But then if you look at chord voicings, you may see something that you wouldn't have played from your arpeggio or that you wouldn't have seen from the single notes, if that makes sense. You know what I mean? So it's a bit of all three, and then just having experience, hopefully playing in different positions. Like, I was really embarrassed to find that I did something recently and they called the tune in F. And I'm like, okay, I need to work more in F. Like, I just played it, I didn't hit bad note. It just was too safe. Do not have the fluidity. I had to work on B flat because of all the jazz stuff and horn players, but I hadn't played an F in a really long time. And then it was a keyboard player. He's like, oh, this one's an F. I'm like, dude, yeah, and then but that's the tune. It's an F, it sounds cool in F. That's what it sounds like to me. So that was one of those ones where I was like, wow, none of your open string shit works. None of my stuff works. All your cliches, all the things you can rely upon. So that for me, I'm like, all right, just gonna play an F all week, and then try not to be, because there's nothing worse than feeling like you caught with your pants down. Fortunately, nobody calls anything an A flat.
Yeah, I appreciate how everyone's been very candid and open about weaknesses because I think that there's, some mysteriousness that prevails still online, and it's like, no, like
Oh
we
no,
all have these things that we
everybody,
gotta.
everybody. I mean, like I mean this with all the utmost respect. Like, there's some of my tunes playing with Robin. Robin's like, yeah, I'm just kind of not fitting in on this one. Like, I'm just trying to figure out what. He's like, yeah, I'm not going to solo on this. He did. He said that once. Like, yeah, you just sound so much better on this. This is your thing. I'm just going to let you do it. And I'm like, wow. And that there's also a lot of strength in that. Like, yeah, that's not my thing. Like I did a gig. It was me and him, and it was John Jorgensen, and they called. John's like, let's play Masquerade. And I'm like, I don't really know. They're like, oh, it's simple. I'm like, I'm not playing this. Just walked off stage. I'm like, these guys are going to do some stuff, and I'm going to walk off stage and get a drink. And I just, came back on because why do that to myself? Like, I'm not going to put myself in a situation where now, had I known ahead of time, but it's not my bag. So I felt confident at this point in my life to go, yeah, I'm not a jazz guy. Like, I studied at school. I can play over changes, but I don't have this vocabulary, and I don't know the tune. They're going to call it. And I'm like, yeah, I don't really know it. I kind of know it, but not enough to want to play it on a stage in front of people. So, and I'm like, all right, let's play, I don't know, jam on this Ingve tune, Far Beyond the Sun. Come on, let's do it. You know what I mean? Like, so it'd be, like it's that not what they would do. So, yeah.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, I mean, I think
Not
there's
that
so
I
much
could play
power
that,
in
but,
that.
I have the guitar, though, so that means I can do it.
I think it's programmed with all the correct notes,
Exactly.
right?
Yeah. It's like that Monty Python skit where he has a lion tamer hat. I want to be a lion tamer. I'm like, well, what qualifications do you have? I have the hat. So,
Perfect.
yeah.
Is there a trick or kind of theory, idea, or concept that had the most bang for buck influence on your guitar playing?
Triads. Yeah, because everything's built upon that. I knew my triads, but when I was younger, and even through like college, this is my own fault. I'm sure the teachers were not, or maybe their methodologies, things I don't like about the Berkeley methodology of teaching that make me freaking nuts that I had to like unlearn. But just seeing that everything is triads are just that's the key to everything. Now that's not the only thing you need to know to play, but that really helped me put everything together. So I thought I knew them. When I was getting at my point was, I'd learned triad arpeggios and assumed that triads is you were playing arpeggios as opposed to these are the notes in the chord, and then you can play this triad on top of that triad, and it gets you the 9, 11, and 13, and then that's that sound. And so triads, that would be it. So at the bass level, you can sound like Keith Richards and kill it. You can play R&B tunes and get the guy who gets the phone call. You start learning that Hendrix kind of, Curtis Mayfield stuff. You get more phone calls. It's all triad based. And then suddenly you're thinking, oh, Larry Carlton's just putting this triad over the top of that. And it's all diatonic. You know what I mean? Like, yeah. So that was it. So it starts at the smallest thing, and then it can lead to the biggest stuff.
Have you ever experienced an injury, strain, tension due to playing? How did this change your playing or practice?
Well, we touched on something before. Yeah, I was playing incorrectly like this. I had my hand bent. And that once you have an injury, you're more likely to continue to aggravate it. I just went to a really great chiropractor that my friend Jason Laughlin recommended. I was having numbness in my left and right, these two fingers, and right here. And I'm like, oh man, what's going on? And I came in and he's like, oh yeah, it's your shoulder and your neck. And it wasn't just chiropractic. It was also that they call it ART, active release therapy. Where like they kind of dig into this muscle and then you move the arm and you're like crying. It hurts so much.
Oh yeah.
But then I walked out and I was like, oh my God. So my point of all that is, I'm starting to try to do exercises to avoid it. Stretches and things, because you sit like this all day, your head's forward, that tech neck and all this shit, and you see yourself in a mirror, you're like this, like your whole my whole body is leaning forward. So I find that that's been a constant thing for me. If I overdo practicing, like when I got the Ingve Strat, I got totally back into shredding just for fun, and I was like, but I knew well enough that I had to be very careful in how I approached it, because it's easy to because once you do the injury, then you got to lay off. So if you just know how you're doing it, okay, I'm going to practice for a little bit, then I'm going to stop. I know I'm really into it, but I got to stop and then come back.
No, it's great. Right. What aspect of practice do you think people overlook the most?
Learning the fingerboard. It's the answer to everything, really. I mean, not everything. It's not the answer to being a great improviser, but it makes everything so much easier. So I think people overlook that because it takes some time and effort. And just start off by learning each string at a time. That's all, you know. And like there's no rush. Just for the next, all right, this week I'm just going to memorize the notes on the high E string. You know, it's not that hard. So I think that's what people most overlook if you're talking about straight on practice. And the other thing I would say is I think no song is too easy to learn. Learn as many songs as you can. I know a ton of rock and blues tunes. I've told this story before because I pull them out of the story drawer. You know, I got calls sometimes for like semi-pro blues bands. Like, oh, can you play it? And I'm like, yeah, sure. You go in there like, oh, do you know? I'm like, yeah. And they're like, do you know him? Yeah. And then they're like, how do you know all those songs? I'm like, it's my job. Like jazz standards. Like they're like, oh, you know My Babe, and you know all these little Walter tunes. I'm like, yeah, it's my gig. You know, like I had to do blues gigs, and I didn't want to be the guy who sounded like rock guy trying to play a blues gig. You know, so learning a lot of tunes, and then also you learn how to play that way. So whether it's learning how to play Wish You Were Here or some Nirvana tune, like just learn all the songs you can possibly learn how to play.
All right, last one. Is playing guitar at a high level more about talent or work ethic?
Oh, work ethic. Oh, fuck yeah. I mean, you can't. All right, yes, there are those people like the Julian Lages of the world who, from a very young age were prodigies, excuse me. And, but no matter how talented an individual he is, and clearly is, he practices his ass off to the point where he got focal dystonia. You know what I mean? Like Robin's whole, full of nonsense. Like, oh, I don't really practice. I'm like, give me a break. He plays all the time. On the couch, unplugged. He's just always playing. So I think talent, but I don't think, okay, and talent, I think, can be overrated in many ways. I don't think all right, so there's a talent that can get you someplace quickly, right? I have a talent for the guitar. I've got a physical talent. Like some people can run faster than other people. So physically, I picked it up easier, let's say. It doesn't mean you can play musically, or progress. Like some people peak real young and then they kind of do the same thing the rest of their life, and not at the same level. You know what I mean? Like, but also I'm just busting on English. But I think Matt and I were talking about this. Imagine being Eric Johnson. Got to be really hard to be Eric Johnson, who I love, obviously. He's the nicest guy. But imagine keeping that level of proficiency up from when you're like 30 with like Cliffs of Dover, where you're just just all the time working at, and then you're like, I don't know, 60 something, where you're like, oh, fuck.
How do I keep this together?
How do I keep this going, man? So I don't know if that answers that question, but once again, I guess I forgot the question when we started talking.
Is playing guitar at a high level more about talent or work ethic?
I think it's still work ethic. I mean, I don't think, I'm not trying to sound patronizing in any way or like false modesty. I know I'm a good guitar player. I don't think I'm particularly talented at it. I think I work just really, really freaking hard. So, and there's guys who drive me nuts because they just have more talent than me. I know that. Like, I keep on talking about Robin. Robin's got more fucking talent than I do. It just does. Like, as much as I want to, it's because he gigged. No, it's why he's Robin Ford. That's why Jeff Beck is Jeff Beck. That's why everybody looks up to these guys, because they just have that thing that I just don't have. And I can beat myself up over it, but I just have to come to some sort of, which I do, of course, all the time. But you got to come to some sort of peace with it. But I can, having an analytical mind, break through a lot of barriers by saying, okay, what are they actually doing? And what it is that I like about it, and then work on it, as opposed to this thing that just happened, which is pretty rare, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. But you can chip away at it, and you can become a great guitar player.
Exactly. Yeah. But hard work, like yourself, like you worked really hard, and then you start to discover your own talent and what you're strong at. So I think a lot of people say to me, like, oh, should I work on my strengths or my weaknesses? I'm like, oh, work on your strengths. I mean, once you're past being able to play the instruments, but, like, my weakness is like, playing over really hard changes and jazz. It's a real weakness for me. I'm like, well, I don't really love it, so why, I'm going to work on, or I know for myself that I have a good sense of melody. So I just work more on that. And turns out my favorite players all kind of, like Mike Landau, you're like, oh man, like it's always just cool, And for me, that's what I aspire to more so than monstrous technique or something.
Totally.